915 Talk is a production of Desert Voice Media. You can visit desertvoice.media to learn more.
915 TALK.
The world is looking at El Paso.
What will we say to the world? From the KELP studio in El Paso, this is 915 Talk.
And now your host.
Good afternoon, beautiful citizens of the borderland. This is 915 Talk, and I am your host, Andy Frecka. Today we are broadcasting from the heart of the world's largest borderplex. We're here at the KELP studio in El Paso, Texas, and we have Mac Daddy Del Norte on the board. Mac Daddy, how you doing?
Hey, Andy, I'm good. How about yourself?
Oh, I realized that I've been living my childhood dream.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I didn't grow up in El Paso.
Uh-huh.
I grew up in Ohio.
Yes.
And I would play out in the woods all day with my brothers growing up.
Nice.
And you know what our dream was?
No, what is it?
Our dream was to grow up and then live in the Wild West.
Oh, Wild West.
Yeah, that was our childhood. And I mean, we're talking, early mid 80s and there in the woods in Ohio. And for us, we would read stories of, the all of the history out here. And as a matter of fact, I kind of felt like I had been cheated because I wasn't born in the 1800s out west in America. So we can't change the time that we were born, but we can move out west. And I would hear all those stories, and of course it was highly romanticized in my mind, I'm sure. That's what we're gonna be talking about today.
Nice.
Because El Paso is very much a part of the Wild West, and we're going to be talking about one of its most notorious. What are we going to call them? Notorious sons of Texas. I don't know what to call them, but I remember in the early '90s the movie came out, Young Guns, and that's when I learned about Billy the Kid. And I was pretty enamored by that. And that's always fun to go up to. You can go up to Lincoln, New Mexico, and they have a great village museum. The whole village is a museum, and you can kind of look at the story of Billy the Kid. Or there's some things that happen out in Old Mesilla, out just outside of Las Cruces with Billy the Kid. But Billy the Kid is famous. But there was someone who was probably even more notorious than Billy the Kid, and that's who we're going to be talking about today.
Right.
And his name was John Hardin. And to talk about John Hardin, we've brought in, according to AI, El Paso's greatest and most interesting. He always shakes his head when I say this. And most interesting historian. But what's cool about this is he portrays John Hardin in these reenactments of the Wild West. And so I know that we've had him on this show several times before. We've talked about all kinds of things with history. We talked about Oñate. We talked about Pancho Villa. We talked about so many different things. But today, I think we're going to talk about his most favorite subject, his most favorite person, possibly.
Nice.
So I really want to jump right into it because there's a lot to talk about.
All right.
With one of El Paso's most colorful residents from the past, and to talk about John Hardin, we're inviting and welcoming the one, the only Sergeant Bernie Sargent. Sergeant, welcome to 915 Talk.
Hola, amigos.
So this is fun because, as I said, you are a historian. You love diving into all these subjects. But am I right in saying this is probably your favorite subject, or top three?
Probably one of my favorite. I portrayed that role of John Wesley Hardin for so many years. I mean, I got killed almost weekly, and unfortunately, I was born again. But it's become kind of a favorite, and people use the term rabbit hole as I've studied more and more about Hardin's family and his acquaintances. I've learned an awful lot more, not only about Hardin, but about the world as a whole in that time period, because just post-Civil War that Hardin really became a name.
Right.
His family moved here. His dad had moved here from the East in the 1850s, and then Hardin was born 1852, just a few miles southwest of Bonham, Texas.
Yeah. Okay. And
Yeah.
and now his full name was John Wesley Hardin, and because we are religious Christian radio, a lot of people will know the name John Wesley. Is that a mistake or is that intentional?
No, that was intentional. His father was a
Okay.
preacher.
Okay.
He was he would ride constantly. In fact, he started a number of different churches, Methodist churches in Texas. The first one being in a little community that is, I mentioned where John was born. It was a little piece of property that was a sort of a way station. So we would call it a rest stop today, but there was an area that was open and there was a creek running through there and trees, very comfortable. Folks would stop and, gather their strength and then continue their journey. In fact, I found out with one of my rabbit hole searches that particular rest stop was used by the natives, the Comanches and other tribes that traveled into the Texas area prior to the time that we were a state. And one very famous individual camped there for a short period of time on his way down to the Alamo, Davy Crockett.
Oh, wow.
And his volunteers that traveled with him into Texas. And I had read that while he was there, he was having such a problem with his long rifle, getting caught up in the underbrush as they were riding, that he made a trade for another rifle while he was there at that campsite. But I learned that quite by accident. Well, when Hardin's father moved to Texas, that was one of the first locations that he stayed at, and he started a Methodist church there. And
Right. Yeah. And for those who don't know, John Wesley, who John Wesley Hardin was named after, was one of the first leaders of the Methodist Church. So it kind of made sense that John Wesley Hardin's dad, as a Methodist preacher, wanted to pay homage to one of the founders, I guess.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I guess this is sort of a I'm sort of saying this jokingly, but it's sort of a cautionary tale to people in religious leaders. What can happen with your children?
Careful what you ask for.
Right. So his family was very religious. They were planting Methodist churches in Texas, and that's the origin story.
Yeah. That's how he came up with the name. Yeah, James was his father's name. In fact, he had an uncle that had moved to Texas also, and there's a Hardin County named after his uncle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. They don't talk too much about John Wesley in the family, but
right. Is there like some kind of explanation that we know of? Because it seems like things escalated pretty quickly in John Hardin's life. And as far as I understand, he claimed to have killed his first man when he was 15. Is there some kind of explanation of what happened? why he went from being a preacher's boy to suddenly this switch, or whatever happened?
There was, I alluded to the fact this was post-Civil War, and quite a number of the people that moved here to what was the Republic of Texas initially, and then became Texas, were from the South, and they were Southern sympathizers. They weren't really happy with the outcome of the Civil War. And Hardin got caught up in that. I think it was something like over 50% of the law enforcement in the state of Texas post-Civil War were freedmen, African Americans. And you had a lot of Southerners down here that just were, they bore a grudge, and they didn't like dealing with this. And a lot of the law enforcement, other than the freedmen that came down here, they didn't like the attitude of the Texans. In fact, even to this day, you hear that from some people. You Texans are, the kind of people that you are kind of strange, and you think too much of yourselves. These folks that came down here as law enforcement, some of them had that same attitude. So it created some animosity amongst people. And the first person that Hardin got into an altercation with, he actually was defending a young lady when he was in school. Somebody had written on the side of the school or the barn that some graffiti, and someone took offense to it and blamed Hardin for it, and he didn't have anything to do with it, and ended up in a knife fight with this kid. and that prompted the family to, well, let's just say they moved. And the second location, the one where his first murder took place, was the son of a blacksmith who was a freedman.
Mhm.
He got in a wrestling match with this kid. The kid was big. He was a big boy. And they didn't think Hardin would win the wrestling match. He did. Well, the kid that he beat didn't like the idea that Wes beat him because like Wes was not near his size. And so he started issuing threats that he was going to ambush Hardin on the way to school, which he set up to do. And when Hardin showed up on horseback, he'd heard about this proposed ambush. So he went to school armed. He borrowed his dad's pistol, didn't ask permission, just took it, and tried to fend the kid off. But the kid kept pushing him and harassing him and hitting the horse, all kinds of things. So Hardin finally shot him. Well,
Oh my.
didn't set well with anybody to speak of. And plus, you had these freedmen, police officers who were looking for Hardin, who had killed this black kid. And so, Dad sent him away. Once again, he was on the run.
Mhm.
So that was the first person to kill. I believe he was somewhere around 15 years old when that took place. And so that was the beginning of it. The kid he shot, his nickname was Mage. They called him Major, but his nickname was Mage. So Hardin took off, and he ended up, I believe he went to Gonzales to hide out, and he had family down in Gonzales. A lot of the Hardin family was all over Texas. So whenever he was hiding somewhere, he was usually hiding with a family member.
Right. And so kind of what you're referring to is, I think you said at the beginning, by understanding John Hardin, you really can understand a portion of Texas history. And I like what you said. Well, I don't know if I like what you said, but it's interesting to learn that many people moved to Texas from the South because they were dissatisfied with the result of the Civil War, but also there were freedmen coming. These were former slaves. And so what I hear you saying is that there was some racial tension in those years in Texas.
Absolutely. Yeah, there definitely was. And that continued for an awful long time, because there were people that just couldn't grow up, and they would say they were religious, but they really, if you dug down deep, they weren't practicing good Bible tactics, so to speak.
Right. Well, it's
behaving.
Right. It's an interesting conversation. It's not the main point of this this discussion, but in El Paso, I will say this: El Paso is, of course, different than a lot of Texas. But one of the things that really struck me when I first came is almost any church you go into, you see so many different ethnicities all together, and no one's thinking a thought about it. And I don't know if that's the way it is everywhere in Texas, but in El Paso, that's always been one of the fun things for me to see, is just so many churches that have so many people. But so John killed Major. Yeah. And he was how old again?
15 years old.
15 years old. Yeah. Okay. So and I guess he probably felt fully in the right in what he was doing.
He did. Yeah. In fact, he always said he didn't kill anybody unless they deserved it. Of course, okay. That was his opinion, but yeah. Right. And just really quickly going back on that, everywhere I've lived in Texas has been that way that it is in El Paso. El Paso is very unique in that it's on the border, but thank God that folks have actually moved on from those old feelings. It's a good thing. So anyway, Hardin, Hardin ended up doing that. Well, he got himself in a little bit more trouble when he was being chased by the law, and he put 3 more notches in his gun. Now, this is 1867 when he and Mage got into it. 1868, when he was being pursued, he killed 3 more law officials. I believe 2 of them were also African American, and 1 was an Anglo. But he was trying to protect himself, so he ended up putting 3 more notches in his pistol.
And if I can interject there, it's interesting. I don't know what I would think about that time, but it's almost kind of cool to learn that the law cared about what had happened enough to try to figure it out and to follow up on this.
Oh, yeah.
Because my I guess my sense of that time would be, well, he shot the former slave, and and everyone might just try to brush over it. But it's great to hear, I think, in a way that the government was trying to bring justice in that situation. And as a matter of fact, it reminds me of our conversation we had about Oñate. And of course, there's a lot of disagreement on what actually happened with Oñate, but it was kind of fun for me to learn that and I guess in a way encouraging, that the Spanish crown cared about the way that the early explorers treated the natives.
Yes.
Yeah, and so a lot of this, what we're talking about, those things aren't small, and so anyway, so Hardin kills this man, and then he's being chased by the law, and he kills three more, and he's about 16 at the time.
Yeah, well, now he's 16. So
yeah. Kids, stay in school. Don't be like John Wesley Hardin.
There you go. So he ends up in Navarro, Texas, in 1869, and was teaching school there. But still there was a lot of heat because folks knew what he had done. So he was always looking out over his shoulder. And that was 1869. So he's in Navarro County. He moves from there to 1870, where he was approached and accosted with somebody with a knife, and he dispatched that individual with his pistol. And
wow.
that was over, I believe they were playing cards when that took place, and he didn't like to lose. Well, the gentleman he was playing cards with pulled a knife on him, and you don't take a knife to a gunfight. And so there was the fifth notch in his pistol that he put forth, and
my goodness.
Yeah. And then continuing on in 1870, he gets involved in an argument in a circus and puts number 7 in his notch. And, so it continues to accumulate, so to speak. And by now he's got quite a reputation. And he's also, he's an avid practitioner of pistolry. He would not only be practice shooting, he would be practice handling. I mean, he could spin the pistol like you see on TV with a lot of these movie stars. I mean, he would put them to shame with the stuff he could do with a pistol.
Right. Well, I saw something, or I read something preparing for this conversation, that he drew his guns differently than most people.
Yeah, there's one instance that took place in the 1870s when he was on a cattle drive, because he had these aspirations of earning enough money because he was being pursued constantly, and maybe moving down to Mexico and starting a ranch down there. Honestly, I couldn't see Hardin sitting still very long, but that was one of his dreams, is to earn some money, go down there. So he got on a cattle drive and followed the trail up to Abilene. And when he got to Abilene, well, on the way to Abilene, he ran into a couple scenarios or a couple situations. There was a lot of cattle drives taking place simultaneously. And there was this one particular group of Mexicans that were driving cattle, and their cattle got intertwined in his cattle. And he was, he met with them. He said, "Look, you got to pull these cattle out." Well, the Mexicans pretty much, they used a lot of language that we won't use on a Christian station, and it didn't settle well. He ended up putting 3 more notches in his pistol.
My goodness, this guy. John Wesley Hardin needs to settle down.
How they're going to keep up with all the ammunition is what I had to ask. But so anyway, he ended up dispatching them, and also there was a game of Monte that they were playing with some of these Mexican vaqueros, and he could be a decent individual, but if you set him off, he had a short fuse, and I think that alcohol didn't help it much either. But so he dispatched them, got to Abilene, and one of the jobs that he took on is he was carrying some of the money for the cattle drive, and because he had the money, he felt he could carry a pistol. Now, there's a lot of different iterations of what took place. Was he the foreman? Was he not the foreman of the cattle drive? Those kinds of things. And I wasn't there, so I can't vouch for it. But it would kind of make sense if you're going to carry a pistol around when there's a strict rule in that town not to have any kind of armor on you, so to speak, that there must be a reason for it. And to me, that sounds like a fairly decent reason to do that. Well, he got accosted by the city marshal, someone I think everybody's heard of, Wild Bill Hickok.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Hickok didn't know who he was because Hardin had taken an assumed name. Now he was not traveling under the name of Wes Hardin or John Wesley Hardin, so he took an assumed name. So Hickok really didn't know who this young upstart was. You figure this is 1870s. He was, I think he was at that time, he was about 18 or 19 years old. And when he was accosted by Hickok to turn over his pistols, he faked like he was handling them with the butt first, okay, in both pistols, one in each hand, but he would roll them around and cock them at the same time. And so Hickok ended up at the business end of the pistols in a flash. And he was quite impressed with what they call the Texas roll, or after that little incident, it became known as the Hardin roll, where you could roll your pistol around and cock it at the same time. But John said, okay, I will adhere to the rules of the law. And he did hang his guns up while he was in town. Now, there was an instance, I think it was at the American hotels where he was staying, and they didn't put insulation in walls, so to speak, like they do now. And he was staying in a room. In the room next to him, there was a gentleman snoring. Well, he commenced to beating on the wall to wake this young man up, whoever it was sleeping in the room next to him. And for some reason, the guy was so sound asleep that he didn't hear the knocking on the wall. So John said, okay, I'm just going to fire a round through the wall to wake him up. Sadly, the individual woke up before he pulled the pistol out and fired, sat up, and ended up taking a bullet, and he went into dreamland permanently.
This was also in Abilene?
Also in Abilene.
Okay, so this John Wesley Hardin character seems a little unhinged. If you're just joining us, we're with El Paso historian extraordinaire Sergeant Bernie Sargent. We're talking about one of El Paso's most colorful former citizens, and John Wesley Hardin. If you're just joining us, we really appreciate you listening in on these conversations each and every weekday afternoon as we learn to love our city, learn to love the history. We've talked about Pancho Villa, we've talked about Oñate, now we're talking John Wesley Hardin. We've talked about so many things related to our borderland community, but we really appreciate Bernie joining us for this. And this is your daily reminder that 915 Talk is a production of Desert Voice Media. You can listen to this 915 Talk or any past 915 Talk conversation by visiting desertvoice.media and click on that 915 Talk link. That's the website, desertvoice.media. We also have a giant green donate button, just so you don't have a hard time finding it, and that helps cover the airtime of this broadcast. We're going to go into a break. Do not touch that dial.
We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial.
Testify.
I used to party a lot in Juarez in my younger years, involved in 3 car crashes due to my addiction to alcohol. I almost lost my life. Thank God I never killed anybody. I'm just here to let you know that by the power of the Lord Jesus Christ, through His Holy Spirit, He transformed my life and He rescued me from alcohol. Jesus Christ can restore anything, and He was the one that made a difference in my life, and I am so grateful for Him. If you trust in Him, I guarantee you that He will not let you down, but you have to believe that He will, and He will do it. By the grace of God, I was involved in prison ministry here at the local county jail for 20 years, and only God knows how many hearts the Lord changed there, because I was just an instrument that would go there and share the truth of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. My name is Ruben Soria, and if God can do this transformation of my life, He can do it to anyone, because there is nothing impossible for God.
And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb
And by the word of their testimony.
desertvoice.media.
We're back. You're listening to 915 Talk.
And we're back. We're with El Paso historian Bernie Sargent. We're talking about John Wesley Hardin, one of El Paso's most unhinged inhabitants, as I'm learning. And when we left to go into the break, Bernie, you were telling the story of someone who made a mistake. They made the mistake of being in a hotel room next to John Wesley Hardin. That's their first mistake. The second mistake was snoring, which is apparently, according to John Wesley Hardin, an unforgivable sin. And so John Wesley Hardin shot them through the wall. Yes. Now, I've lost track. First of all, how old is John Wesley Hardin at this point? How many notches does he have on his belt, so to speak? And was this in Abilene still?
Yeah, 1871.
Okay.
In Abilene. And
okay.
Let's see, 4, 5, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. He's up to 20.
Okay. At the age of 18, he's up to 20. What did the town marshal, Bill Hickok, have to say about him dispatching of a snoring man?
Well, he ended up leaping out the window into the back of a wagon that was loaded with hay. And they rode off, and somebody had to go back and get his clothes because he just took off like a bat out of purgatory, and got himself a little bit east of town, where he put everything together and headed back south again, back into Texas. But it didn't go over too well. He killed the man for snoring. But
it seems like, sometimes we have on this program Robert Hart of Living Hope Christian Counseling Service. It's too bad that John Wesley Hardin wasn't able to take advantage of Living Hope Christian Counseling Service. It sounds like he needed some help.
He could use a touch.
Yeah, he struggled with a bit of a temper. Okay, so he escaped in a wagon. Now what?
Well, he headed south. Again, he had an assumed name up in Kansas Territory and Oklahoma. Down south, everybody knew who he was by now. They didn't have Snapchat or anything like that back in the day, so they go with these drawings that people would post of people. And I saw some of them. In fact, I've got copies of some of the posters that they had hung showing his picture. I would not have been able to identify him from the pictures, the drawings. They weren't that good. So he was, he was able to avoid being arrested or by any stretch of the means. Anyway, he ends up back down in Texas, and he runs into he stays at his aunt's house, Aunt Martha, and Martha Clements. And the Clements name will come up again here a little bit later in the story.
Okay.
But Clements were related, and stayed down with her, and then ended up getting involved in an altercation in Willis, Texas. Now, I've not been able to substantiate it, but I've had a number of people that live here. Willis is just a stone's throw away from where I live right now. And a lot of folks here swear by the fact that he ended up getting in a shootout in Willis, Texas. I'm trying to validate that, but they're claiming there was 3 people killed.
Okay.
Yeah. And then he continues south again. He's down to Cherokee County, and he's runs into a situation where he gets wounded with a shotgun blast by a sheriff there. Phil Sublett was his name, and he gets wounded, and it's pretty severe. This is a wound that will go with him to the day he dies. But he surrenders himself to a Sheriff Reagan in Cherokee County, and figures that sheriff will take care of him. The sheriff didn't realize there were so many victims, so many notches in his pistol. So when Hardin went with this particular sheriff to jail, he was looking more for medical attention, and which he obtained while he was in jail, enough to where he got himself cured, or I should say healed quite a bit from the shotgun blast, and escaped from the jail, because he realized after being there for a short time that that particular sheriff was amassing information on this ne'er-do-well by the name of John Wesley Hardin. So his days were pretty much numbered, and he didn't want to go to prison. So he got himself out of there. But and in the process, he ended up getting into a little altercation with a couple of other law enforcement agents. and killed 2 of them as well. He was on the run. So they just continued. Now we're up in 1873, and by now he's up to over 30 that he has notched in his pistol. It's just amazing. I would need bigger handles because all those notches. But it's just amazing how many people. What's interesting too, when you talk about back in those time period, and you talk about the folks that got notoriety, most of it is because Hollywood had given them the notoriety. And you don't see too much activity with John Wesley Hardin in the movies or on TV, and I can talk about that a little bit later in our discussions. But Hardin was just ongoing all over. I've got a map. In fact, I think I'll share that with you. And if you want to put that online with this interview, it shows the where he traveled and where these folks met their demise at his behest. And it kind of gives you an idea of just what kind of a bad guy he was. And I think I mentioned to you once before when we were talking about something else that he had a problem. He had real bad hemorrhoids. And now, if you can imagine, here's a guy that's traveled literally thousands of miles on horseback with hemorrhoids, riding, as they call it, tall in the saddle, because they didn't want to irritate the hemorrhoids. Maybe that's one of the reasons he shot so many people.
This whole story is really astonishing, and I never thought I would be such a proponent for facial recognition as I am right now, because you would like to think that nobody could get away with this kind of thing in the year 2025, but we really don't know from the historical record why he was this way. I mean, you made the joke about hemorrhoids, but why was he so angry, or why did he have such a temper?
Well, one of the things I kind of look at too is back in the day when folks had reputations, somebody always wanted to one up you on that reputation.
Okay.
So if you were a bad guy and you rode into town, somebody said, "Well, I can be badder than him," or whatever.
Right.
And that could lead to some problems too. And I don't think anybody. Well, now he's over 30 people. He certainly didn't want to go to jail for that, or be caught, and in some instances, as you'll find out as we talk, be hung without trial. And that happened quite often back in the day too. So these are the kind of things I think are just building up on him. Now, how we got to this point, I don't know. He was really good at it.
Yeah,
but he was really good at it.
And it's interesting. His family, it seems, was always willing to take him in wherever he went. And they somehow must have known at least something of his reputation, but they were okay in taking him in.
It was amazing that wherever he went with his family, his cousins or direct family, mom and dad, sisters and brothers, they would take him in, and he wouldn't stay long because they knew that eventually somebody's going to be knocking on the door. But they would stay there long enough to where he could gather a little more energy and take off again, or reload his pistols, whatever he had to do.
Right. Now,
go ahead.
Yeah, let me say, it's also interesting to just begin to understand the whole geography of this whole thing, because we're talking vast distances, and my son is going to be going to Abilene for college, and it's interesting driving there from El Paso. You drive about 7 hours east, and when you get there, they say that they're the capital of West Texas, and and then Willis, Texas, which is his latest escapade, we'll call it that, is down close to Houston. These are long distances to drive in a car, but when you have hemorrhoids and are riding high in the saddle, as you say, and are angry and have a temper and the sun's beating down, I mean, what a picture. What a picture.
Oh, yeah.
So
they didn't have the paved roads we've got today either. They were cutting through underbrush and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I know, with hemorrhoids. But it quite a lifestyle. That's why I wanted to put together that map that I'll share with you.
Sure.
Where he went, where he covered. Now, and we've not even talked about Florida yet, or Tucson.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, he was all over the place on horseback. And I found it fascinating when I mapped it out. I said, whew, I know from where we live right now to El Paso, where we used to live, it's 792 miles.
Yeah.
You imagine that on horseback with hemorrhoids?
Uh, and it's summertime and triple digit temperatures and no water
No air
and
conditioning, no
yeah,
internet.
yes. Yeah. I have a swamp cooler at my house, and when it hits triple temperatures, triple digits, I can't sleep. And here he is out in the sun.
Yeah.
No wonder he was so angry. I think we found the reason, Bernie.
I'd have an attitude also. Yeah. But it's, it was, and then now what happens now is he gets close to a family, the Taylor family.
Mhm.
And it's kind of sad because that was a situation where there was still a lot of animosity about the outcome of the Civil War. And they had, with one of the longest running feuds in the state of Texas, was a Taylor-Sutton War. And that's where the Taylors, who were sympathizers of the South, and you had the Suttons, who were sympathizers of the North, didn't get along. So there was a lot of killing going on between those two families. And Hardin got involved by way of his cousin in that clash. And as a result of that, there was a couple of folks that met the end of their life cycle, so to speak, because of John Wesley Hardin, because of that relationship that he had with the Taylors in the Sutton War.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there was, I think that they estimate 5, maybe 6 that he killed as a result of that particular fracas that was taking place. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Right. So where are we at now? He was in Willis, Texas, and you said something about Florida and Arizona.
Oh, well, I'll get to that.
Okay. All right.
Coming up.
Yeah. And I will say, for those listening, you can go to desertvoice.media, click on the 915 talk link. We'll put the map up there as part of this conversation, just so folks can view it and see exactly the enormity of the infamous escapades of John Wesley Hardin. I think we are defining right now, Bernie, the word infamous.
Oh, yeah.
Famous for all the wrong reasons. All right.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I've had people ask me, why do you celebrate him? I said, I don't celebrate him. And I said, that's the kind of a lifestyle you don't want around.
Right.
But there's always a fascination with those kinds of people. And
sure. All right.
Yeah.
So let's continue on this journey with our short-tempered, hemorrhoidal Texas gunslinger.
Well, now he's met a merchant's daughter, and they got married.
Okay.
And they had 3 children together, which was an interesting side story also with the 3 children. But so they got married, they had 3 children, and he still continues his ways, and she sticks by him the whole time. In fact, it got to a point where they had gone over to Florida to get away from the pursuit that was taking place. And on his 21st birthday, he decides to go back to Comanche, Texas, where his mother and father are, as well as some of his other relatives, to celebrate his 21st birthday. Well, he gets together with his cousins and his one of his brothers, and they're walking down the street, and Sheriff Webb shows up, and he knows who Hardin is. And he told Hardin, he goes, "I'm not here to arrest you." And Hardin said, and Webb says, I don't want to do that. Hardin says, okay. So as they're invited to go in to have a drink, the sheriff reaches inside of his vest, and one of Hardin's cousins thinks he's pulling a gun. So they open fire on Sheriff Webb, and they end up killing him. Hardin knows that things are going to get from bad to even more worse. So he takes off. Well, his 2 cousins and his brother get captured and put in jail. And an angry mob breaks into the jail, pulls them out, and they hang them both. So fortunately, Hardin did leave, and he headed to Florida to get away from it with an assumed name. His last name is Swain, which happened to be the name of a law officer in was it Brenham, Texas, I believe. And he assumed that name to hide out in Florida. Well, in Florida, he kills 3 more people in Florida because of gambling problems. They stand up to him. He doesn't agree with them. They threaten him. He kills them. So this takes place there. Well, there is a gentleman in Texas who convinces the Texas governor to give him authority to reach out to Florida and to go into Florida and try to find him. Because by now what they've done is they've located him being somewhere in the border area of Florida and Alabama, living there under the assumed name. His brother sends a letter to one of the family members, I believe it was his mother, and unfortunately mentions Florida. So that substantiates the guesswork. And so this lawman heads off to Florida and under the direction of the governor of Texas to arrest Hardin. There's a bounty on him of $4,000, which in today's money is about $98,000. So it's a pretty hefty bounty on him.
Sure.
And fortunately for folks, unfortunately for John Wesley Hardin, he's riding on a train right about the border of Alabama and Florida, where this lawman finds him along with a couple of his deputies. Hardin's gun gets caught on his suspenders as he's trying to defend himself, because he realizes right away when he sees pistols being pulled that he's being arrested. They roll him on the floor, they put him in chains, and they take him back to Texas to stand trial in Comanche for the murder of Sheriff Webb. They're not even approaching all the other people that he's killed. And when they get him to Comanche, they actually have chains on him. I mean, so many chains that they have to help him stand because they just don't want him to get loose. There's one story where they were taking him from the jail to the courthouse, and there were the girls were infatuated with him, which is amazing to me. And one of these little gals was standing by the side of the road, and he looked down. He says, mighty pretty little redhead there, young lady." So he was still flirting with the women in chains. In fact, I'll tell you a story. When they were bringing him back to Texas on the train, they had to stop and refill the locomotive with water. Every stop they made, people would line up to look in and a chance to see John Wesley Hardin.
Wow.
That's how infamous that man was.
Yeah, and just a reminder to our listeners, he was married and had 3 children at the time as well.
Yes, he did.
Okay.
So he's sentenced to 25 years at Huntsville. And they sent him off to Huntsville. Initially, he tried to get out a couple of times, and then he became a model prisoner. Now, get this. He became an ordained minister and taught Bible class. And, so you think, he's come to the Lord by now. Well, the story doesn't end there.
Yeah. Well, I think for those folks who are concerned about hypocrisy in their churches, you can rest assured that you don't have anyone this bad in your church right now.
God knows we hope not. And not only is he an ordained minister, he becomes a lawyer too. Now, those two seem like an oxymoron, but that's what he did. And he became a model citizen, a model prisoner. In fact, there was a prison uprising. They being the prisoners, wanted Hardin on their side, and he refused to do it. But the warden went to him and said, Mr. Hardin said, "We know your proficiency with weapons. Can you help us?" And he helped the warden to apprehend the prisoners. In fact, he shot a couple of them. He was a much better shot than any of the guards were. So they used his talents to quell the riot. Well, he ended up, I know, he ended up serving only 17 years of the 25-year sentence. And about a year and a half before he got out of prison, his wife passed away, leaving his kids were teenagers with family members. So they never really knew their dad. I mean, they didn't have a chance to really get to know him when he went to prison. And so he goes off gets out of prison. He heads off into Texas again and wants to hang a shingle as an attorney. Didn't look like he wanted to become a minister when he got out of prison, but wanted to become an attorney. And in the process meets this pretty young girl who is 1/3 his age, and she's totally infatuated with him, as most people are when he shows up. They want to meet this infamous John Wesley Hardin. Now, he's made amends because he's been in prison, so now he's a celebrity of note. And unfortunately, being a celebrity of note, that means they're also going to be purchasing him drinks whenever he's thirsty, those kinds of things.
Right.
They want to see his shooting prowess. So he would, at 40 paces, he would shoot holes in playing cards, things like that. So he commenced to to drinking and playing cards. He meets this young gal. And like I said, she was 1/3 his age. I believe she was 15 years old. They get married because his parents are infatuated with him also. And they figure, well, he's made amends. And they're only married about a month. They go down to Mexico for a brief honeymoon, come back, and immediately separate. And she goes off one direction, he goes off another direction. And the story goes that maybe it was when they were in the throes of being married that all those wounds, knife wounds and bullet wounds, really weren't appealing to her. So they separated, and he took off. He went back to Comanche, and then he ended up getting a note from his cousin, Clements. Remember I mentioned the name Clements?
Right.
Who was in Las Vegas, New Mexico.
Okay.
He goes up there to serve as an attorney to help get one of Clement's friends out of jail, who's been kind of sent there under the, well, let's just say there was a couple of cattlemen who didn't like this guy. So they kind of set him up for a fall. His name was Martin Morose. Well, Martin is in jail. They get him out of jail. Hardin never really gets to meet Morose. He gets a situation where he's defending another client in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and that court case gets moved to El Paso. So he goes with his contingent of followers down to El Paso to help with the lawsuit. And they all get to Texas or to El Paso, and they're met at the train station by the city marshal, who knows Hardin's coming. And he goes, "I don't want any trouble here." And Hardin goes, "You're not going to get any trouble from me." Well, that didn't work out too well, because there was a young lady by the name of Helen Beulah Morose, Beulah being a Jewish word meaning married. The story is she assumed that name because she was, well, let's just say she got married to Martin Morose, but she wasn't legally divorced from her first husband. And there was a federal law against that, which could land her in jail. So she assumed the name of Beulah. They're saying to offset the thought or the story that maybe she was married. No, yeah, she is married to Martin. Martin by now is running away from the other cattleman who had trumped up charges against him. He's in Mexico with a handful of money. Beulah's in El Paso with a handful of money. And she wants Martin to come back to El Paso, but lo and behold, alcohol weighs into it one more time. Hardin ends up with her, and they become an item in El Paso. And Martin finds out about it. He's over in Mexico. He wants to come back to El Paso, make amends with his wife, who he truly loved, and go off somewhere with her. He had aspirations, again, of like John did in his early days, go into Mexico, build a ranch, get some livestock, that kind of thing. And he is, let's just say, invited to come back to El Paso, and he thinks that maybe things are on the up and up. So he's following the direction of a U.S. Marshal and the city marshal to meet on the north side of the Rio Grande River from Juarez, and to, let's just say, iron things out, come back into El Paso, clear up his trumped up charges, get his wife, and then leave. Well, when he gets to the bridge, he's standing on the bridge and he hears a rustling in the bushes. The folks in El Paso were a little nervous about Martin. And so when the deputy U.S. Marshal and the sheriff met him, they had a couple of posse members standing in the bushes waiting just in case Martin would do something stupid. Well, when Martin heard the rustling in the bushes, he pulled his gun out, and he died of lead poisoning right there on the spot. So this freed up John Wesley and Beulah to continue unencumbered by the fact that her husband was in Juarez, and so
my goodness, yeah,
they carried on. Alcohol got the best of them. In fact, there was a situation where Hardin would get in. When he was drinking, he would play with the guns in his room, and she was impressed. She wasn't intimidated to be afraid, but she was intimidated. And one time they both got drunk, and he forced her to sign a suicide note, and then he promptly passed out, and she rolled him down the stairs. And that's when they got kicked out of the apartment that they were living in, and she took off. Well, when she took off, Hardin was very, very upset about it. And let's just say he was not a happy camper. He had some business to attend to, And the story is that she probably went over to Arizona, where the parents of her first husband had set up a ranch in Arizona. So there's stories that maybe she went over there to visit them for a short period of time. Hardin continued to gamble and drink. He got busted for having his pistols on him one time. He paid the fine. I think it was a $25 fine, which he paid. He bought interest in the Gem Saloon, which didn't last very long, and because he was drinking the profits mostly. So things were really getting ugly. Well, he comes back into town, excuse me, and he decided he has to go take care of some business, so he leaves town. Well, while he's out of town, Beulah decides that she's lonely and she wants to strike up some excitement. So she takes a pistol and goes in a bar and starts drinking, and she starts to shooting up the bar. Well, she gets arrested by this young upstart policeman by the name of John Selman Jr. John Selman Jr. Knew about Hardin. He, in the back of his mind, according to stories I've read, he was one of those upstarts that said, "Hey, nobody's going to be meaner than me." But he arrests Beulah, and to make an example of her, he fines her $50. Well, remember when I said that Hardin got busted and paid $25? $50 was a lot of money. So when Hardin got back into town, not only was angry about the fine, he was also angry at her for shooting up the bar. And so he goes out looking for John Selman Jr. And everybody in town knows that he's trying to find this kid, young police officer, and he doesn't find her. But what he does find is John Selman Sr., who was a constable. And John Selman Sr. also has a very stellar track record. He was involved in the Civil War. He was involved in cattle rustling. He was involved in a lot of things that were not good, but now all of a sudden he's a constable. That seems to be a track record for a lot of these people. They go from bad to good. He becomes a constable. And he finds out about Hardin looking for his son, so he confronts him on the streets, San Antonio Street in El Paso. And he says, "I understand you're looking for my son." He goes, "Well, yeah, I took my woman and he fined her $50. I'm going to find him." And Selman challenges him to a gunfight right there. Hardin says, "I'm not healed," meaning he has no weapons on him. I seriously don't believe that, but that's what he told Selman. And he tells Selman, he goes, "Well, I will." Selman says, "Well, get yourself healed." He says, "Well, I do. When I get myself healed, I'll meet you." And well, he used a lot of profanity, but he says, "I'll meet you, and I'll meet you smoking." In other words, he's going to set fire to him with the pistols. Because when you use those black powder pistols, chances are pretty good when you shot somebody, if you're a fairly close range, it would set your clothes on fire. In fact, if you see some of the cowboys in the old movies, they'll have powder burns down the side of their trousers or chaps, and that's from the black powder from the pistols. So when he said, "I'll meet you smoking," it was alluding to the fact that he's going to set him on fire with his pistols.
My goodness.
Yeah. So that's about maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. Well, Selman's stewing. I mean, he is absolutely angry now. He wants to make amends. He knows that Hardin's looking for his son. So as the story goes, Hardin goes into the Acme Saloon, and he starts shooting dice for drinks with a merchant by the name of Brown, and they're standing at the bar shooting dice. Selman walks in the bar, sees him, turns around, walks back out, and he puts himself on top of one of these kegs outside the bar and sits there for a minute or two. And several people walk by asking him what he was up to. He goes, "Oh, I'm just sitting here." And so there's a whole lot of interviews that took place with folks that witnessed this, the next event that took place. Selman finally, he goes, "I've had it." Gets up, walks in the bar, fires 4 rounds directly at John Wesley Hardin, hits him three times out of 4, kills him instantly with a bullet to the back of the head. And then his son runs in, grabs him, says, "Dad, you've killed him. He's dead. He's dead. Get out." Well, there was such notoriety of this gentleman by the name of John Wesley Hardin that women literally dipped their dresses in his blood as he laid there on the floor as a souvenir. And one kid who became fairly well known as a writer in El Paso, Owen White, he was a kid at the time. He crawled through the legs of the people just to see who was laying there on the ground. And it turned out to be John Wesley Hardin.
My goodness.
Unbelievable.
And how old was Hardin at this point?
42, I believe.
42. Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. What a life journey, you know. It's kind of like I'm speechless, Bernie. Like what kind of conclusion do you draw from all of this?
But
Is there a conclusion to be drawn?
No, not really. In fact, the plot thickens because one of the things that Hardin and Beulah had talked about was he would travel. He would do a little traveling show, and in his autobiography, he even wrote about sharing his story, his life with people. So they thought they could make some serious money in that. She had loaned him, I think it was $1,500 to set up an office in an old bank building that burnt down back in, I think it was 2012, downtown El Paso. So he had an office in there, hung a shingle there as an attorney. And so she loaned him money. He spent it obviously on drinks and so on. She thought, now that he's dead, she can probably grab the manuscript from his autobiography. She could sell it, get some of her money back. But unfortunately, one of Hardin's kids came to town, and the judge gave her the autobiography and some of the belongings that Hardin had left behind. And so Beulah was left penniless. And so she ended up going out to California and becoming a woman of ill repute out there with her daughter. And when she got to San Francisco, the daughter's name was Laura. She knew that her lifestyle wasn't going to be good for her daughter. Duh. And so she put her up for adoption. And the Catholic Church out there had an adoption program. And so they said, okay, we'll do this. Now, the adoption program they had was interesting in that if you were a direct relative of that child, you could actually retrieve that child back from the adopted parents. And so the gal Laura lived with his family in a very high-end area of San Francisco. She was getting piano lessons. She was going to private schools, really living the lifestyle. Well, lo and behold, one day, the gentleman standing out front of the house, as it turns out, it was her father. And he had traveled to San Francisco and found her. And so the Catholic Church had to live up to their commitment. He was a direct relative. He took Laura back to Texas. And she grew up in Fredonia, Texas. He did buy her a piano because she was taking piano lessons, but she was not living the lifestyle she was living in San Francisco. And so she lived out the rest of her days in Texas. Beulah, on the other hand, went to Alaska for a trip, because that's during the post gold rush. There was other smaller gold rushes up there. Came back to California, went to Sacramento, where she lived as a woman of ill repute, and that's where she died and is buried.
Wow, we are totally running out of time, Bernie. This is interesting for me also because as I started the conversation, I was telling Mac Daddy that I grew up romanticizing the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
This story of John Wesley Hardin takes away some of the romance. Although at the time it appears that the people were enjoying this wild lifestyle, this wild society, as you talk about the women swooning over someone who was really just a maniac, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So what a story.
Andy, you look at people now that they're sending love letters to this guy that killed that CEO of that pharmaceutical company.
Right.
What possesses them? I don't know. Right.
Yeah, and yeah, what an interesting part of Texas history, El Paso history. It's interesting you mentioned these different saloons. They're just right here, a stone's throw from where we live here in El Paso. Of course, it all happened right here, and wow, what a history! Really appreciate your time, Bernie, as always.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yes, of course. Look forward to future conversations. And as we always say, let's learn to love our city and love our neighbors, unlike John Wesley Hardin. And let's give God all the glory. This has been 915 Talk. You have been listening to 915 Talk, a production of Desert Voice Media. In order to listen to previous editions of 915 Talk, just visit desertvoice.media. Let's learn together to love our city, love our neighbors, and give God all the glory.